Alrighty, I think we're live. Hello, good evening, everyone. Good evening. I am so glad that everyone is able to join us tonight while we are waiting for folks to get linked in and join us. I am going to share a bit of information, kind of outline some of the things that are significant about how we're going to start today, and then we'll jump right into our panel discussion on disability, academic accommodations, and advocacy. This is the Diversity Roundtable. My name is Dr. Darlene Davis Goodwine. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. If you were with us last fall, welcome back. While everybody is joining in, do feel free to share where you're listening to us from. So I'm in Kentucky. If you've joined me before, you know I've been in Michigan, and then I was in Ohio. So I'm a traveler, and I just traveled my way on down 75 and landed in a bluegrass state. So feel free to share where you're joining us from. And as you're doing that, I'm going to give our good old IOCDF disclaimer. This is a live stream, and it's intended to serve as as educational content. It is not, however, intended to replace therapy. So for treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The IOCDF is not a crisis hotline. This platform is not meant to address crises. And so in the event you feel you are in distress, or you feel you are unsafe, or if you find yourself in the midst of a crisis, please feel free to contact your local emergency room, call 911, or call the suicide prevention hotline at 1-800-273-8255. Now, this space is definitely a safe space. As the facilitator, I have made it my mission to make it just that. And so in order to do that, we really are hyper-focused on being kind and being respectful of everyone. So with that, this is being broadcast on various social media platforms and is being recorded. So please be mindful of that as you ask personal questions, share your personal experiences, or leave comments. At the end of the day, we're all here to support one another. And in my experience, we've far exceeded that. Katie was just joking about the nighttime chat rooms and how it's kind of like a tea time or spirited inside joke time. So please continue that energy as we can work to move into today's topic. So let's get started. I welcome everybody to the IOCDF Diversity Roundtable. I am your moderator. This is our first roundtable as we return from what I like to call a summer break. It wasn't much of a break, but I appreciate the pause. And so we're getting back into it. If this is your first time, you've missed a lot of fruitful conversations around diversity. We've talked about advocacy. We talked about creating safe spaces. We talked about lifting our voice in advocacy. And we talked about diversity in action. When I thought about the topic for today's panel, I thought about what other aspects of diversity can we bring to the space. And so we are all in some way impacted by back to school, whether you have little people returning to school, whether you're driving behind the bus on the street and having to stop, whether you're joining the traffic because 5 o'clock and 8 o'clock, I mean, we're all impacted by back to school. And so what better way to talk about and anchor us in a conversation around abilities? And one of the spaces that we know the IOCDF community has drawn some attention to is the academic space. There is an initiative that we'll talk about later on as we close things out. And also there's a live stream going on around anxiety in the classroom. But I wanted to bring folks today to this panel to speak specifically about their observed and lived experiences around what it means to be a learner, to be a scholar, to advocate for, to experience what it means to assist someone in transitioning through what we all navigate in our experiences through education. So with that, I would like to open the floor for our panelists, and feel free to share with the listeners your name, your role, your identities as you are comfortable sharing, what you're hoping to share in this space, and anything that you think is interesting, because as I shared before, this is very conversational. We're hoping to invite folks into our dialogue. So I'll let you guys take over. Who'd like to go first? I told y'all there'd be a pause, didn't I?
Okay.
All
Go, please go.
Okay. Well, I'm Katie, and hello to everyone. I see lots of familiar faces in familiar names in the chat, so it's great to be here with y'all tonight. And I always like to note, you see the Reverend, I am an ordained minister and interfaith chaplain, but I'm incredibly informal. Katie is perfectly fine. But I always like to make the note that clergy do, in fact, navigate mental health struggles too, and there is no shame in seeking treatment while engaging in your faith tradition. My pronouns are she and her. I identify as an ordained minister, but also spent a long time in interfaith school chaplaincy. So the last 7 years, I worked at the biggest private school in the continental US as the Academy chaplain, working with students who were Jewish and Christian and Muslim and Buddhist and Sikh and Jain and atheist and agnostic and beyond. And I was in charge there of interfaith literacy and interfaith programming from pre-K to 12th grade, was teaching comparative religions to 12th graders, where this accommodation piece came up often. By the time I left, I taught about 1,500 teens in comparative religions, and was really leading grief and trauma efforts throughout the school. And a lot of my work actually became about inclusion and diversity, both in the area of religion, but also in the area of ability and in the area of gender and race and really anything you can imagine. So this conversation within the school setting is really significant to me, particularly as someone who has OCD. My first half of my journey in school chaplaincy, I was completely in secret about my OCD. I had a lot of shame about being a faith leader, navigating my own mental health struggles. And throughout the second half of my journey there, I started to come out and be more open about that, specifically because of students that felt like they weren't able to voice their mental health struggles within their faith communities. And I felt like it was my role as someone they looked up to show them that they could do that. I now work in faith and OCD full time and work with a lot of young people, helping clinicians and different folks kind of navigate what ERP looks like in different faith communities. But my heart is still very much in the area of the students that I have spent so much time with, and I'm excited about this conversation tonight.
Thanks, Katie. Well, I'm Kim Vincenti, and I'm the mom of an OCD sufferer, and our journey started over 18 years ago, back in the Wild West days when nobody knew what this was, what it looked like, how it manifested, and how to deal with it in the school setting. So, from the start, I had to be the educator, the advocator, the go-to mom then for the school about what anxiety and OCD looks like in students. I recently wrote a blog about my most epic back to school story with my son. It's posted on the IOCDF website. But we have lots of stories about how OCD significantly impacted my son's education, but how we navigated that and made it possible for him to be successful, fulfilling the academic requirements, but also coming up with meaningful accommodations that would allow him to successfully get through each and every year. And every year looked different, and every year presented its own challenges. But I was formerly with OCD Jacksonville, an affiliate of the International OCD Foundation. I most recently served as president with that organization, and I left this year and started my own nonprofit named after my son, Jack Mental Health Advocacy. And we are very much focused on helping the families and sufferers navigate the myriad challenges of OCD, and how to reduce stigma, get education, and we have a strong focus on educating clinicians, because we know the best way to get somebody help is to get them with a clinician that's adequately trained to treat OCD.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, I think what you're doing is really helpful. Is there an echo for anyone else, or is that just on my end?
I don't hear it.
Okay. there's a bit of an echo for me. But I think what you're doing is really helpful. As a student, currently I'm a senior in, well, first let me introduce myself. My name is Ma. I use she, her pronouns. I am a senior in college in undergrad, and I'm studying psychology and neuroscience. So I am the OCD sufferer, or I like to call it warrior, I guess, person living with OCD. There are a bunch of different ways you can put it. But I've been living with OCD since right before high school. So I've gone through all of high school and all of college with OCD. And I have been through, like Kim was saying, every year looked different. So I've been through a lot of different things, the whole transition from high school to college. I can talk about that. I can talk about the transition from college and beyond, which is what I'm dealing with right now, which OCD also impacts, of course. So yeah, I am the student with OCD here, and I can help answer any questions anyone has about the student experience with OCD. I'm also very interested in education and making sure people with OCD can be connected to educated clinicians. And I just think everything that everyone on this panel is doing is amazing, and I'm really excited to get started.
I am so grateful. I feel like, so a little bit about me. I am a clinician. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I've treated OCD across the lifespan, from youth to young adults to older adults. And this, what I bring to this space, I originally came to this space because I'm very interested in the work of preparing clinicians to work effectively with the Black community specifically. There's a huge gap in services, as we know generally, and then specific to the Black community, it's just abysmal. And it was just exacerbated so much in COVID, as we saw, as the OCD community saw COVID, OCD have its way with COVID amongst the OCD sufferers. So when I thought about this space, and I thought about, and Skyla, again, thank you so much for pulling this panel together. I thought about what would be the best use of this space as we anchor it in diversity, because the Diversity Roundtable is very much pushing the envelope beyond just the awareness that we find ourselves discussing often when we use the word diversity. So I felt very strongly about us just doing more than talking about stuff. So I have intentionally infused, like, all right, what are we gonna do about it? Like, I'm very much about action. I'm a doer. If you've ever been in therapy or facilitated therapy, you have clients who come in, they're like, okay, I don't want to talk about it anymore. What are we doing? That's me, right? Like, I am that person. What are we gonna do about it? And so to have all of this lived experience, I thought it's a gold mine. So from that space, I want you all to share with me, if you could think about one myth and one myth and one truth about OCD, and frame it in the way that I talked about as the Diversity Roundtable is about action. Like, how did it show up? And then how do you address it, right? Like, how did it manifest? Does that make sense? Like, that myth and that truth, because we know that there are myths about OCD, right? Everybody's assuming that the person with OCD is cleaning somewhere. That's not how it goes. As a clinician, I know that. We know this. So talk to me about that experience, the myth and the truth. How did it show up for you? Or how did you observe it, even with from Kim's perspective?
Well, for us, obviously my son's OCD started out very much contamination spectrum. And I think once I tried to explain to the faculty and his peers and everything else what was going on, the expectation was that his OCD was always around that. And as we all know, OCD changes up all the time. And so, his triggers would be different, but especially middle schoolers in their very, cruel way would say, oh, well, he's obsessed with me, or he's obsessed about this. And he wasn't obsessed about any of that, but it was just this tagline. It was the assumption that it was always contamination, and it was the assumption that anything they thought they wanted to attach to his behavior, he was obsessed with. And of course, that just fried mommy, and I had to figure ways to educate the teachers and educate his peers without getting my dander up, which was a challenge.
Which was hard, right?
Because when you're bullying my baby,
That's right. That's right. And specifically to what you said about, I think that's interesting from an educational space. So anyone who's here or who's ever navigated educational dynamics in general, it's like they need, because of the limited training and exposure and understanding they have, they like, okay, we've tagged it, we know what it is. All right, this is what we're doing forever. It's like, absolutely not. And then you add the social piece. So there's the administrative piece, and then you have the social piece, right? So then you have all the developmental things, and then trying to explain to them like, okay, this is developmental. Okay, this is OCD, right? Like, which is difficult even for parents, because some parents are like, well, I don't know which one is OCD either. So yes, Kim, that had to be tough.
So for me, just to tack on to Kim's, I was thinking about the myth and the truth. And I think a big myth in working in education was this idea that it's the same thing we talk about actually often with anxiety in athletes, that OCD somehow helps you in your learning and in your organization, which is a big myth, which I'm sure Maya can speak to. I see Maya shaking her head. And that was very much, my experience growing up too, that especially with a diagnosis, there were always these comments around, wow, that just makes you an even better student. And it's like, no, I'm actually working my butt off to stay afloat in school because of my OCD. It's not making me a better student. So there was always that component. And particularly when I came out more about my story and working with students, I used to really struggle with how to respond, because I would have families say things to me like, well, I wish my child had OCD. They would be more organized. And I'm like, nope, that is not remotely what OCD is, nor is it helpful for your child. And you're also stigmatizing the other students in my class. And so that was always a really tough piece. I think the truth is that by actually acknowledging that OCD is a debilitating disorder, we can also acknowledge that it's treatable through evidence-based treatment, and that there is an amazing opportunity for our students within all sorts of different schools to receive that treatment if our educators and our administration is really aware of what OCD looks like, and also ways to refer and recommend treatment. I think another truth is that educators, while we might not always be aware of this, want to help and want to be a part of that collaborative process, particularly with accommodations. And my favorite thing would be when a student would come in and say, hey, I'm working with a treatment provider. Here are the accommodations I have. Can I explain them to you? Can we talk about them? And I think that's like an educator's, at least in my perspective, an educator's dream. And that's very much a truth that I want everyone to know, that you can go in and talk to your professor or talk to your teacher and say, hey, this is what I need, and have that conversation about it. So I'm rambling. I'll pause with that.
Yeah, piggybacking off of what you said, Katie, I was actually going to say something very similar. So I guess we were on the same wavelength. I was going to talk about specifically perfectionism OCD in school. Perfectionism OCD was really prevalent during like the first half of my high school years. And it was really difficult to tell, for me at least. I was like, well, I don't know if I'm getting good grades because of the perfectionism or because of the OCD, or is this just like who I am? And I think I've heard a lot of students, even in college, I started a support group for students on my campus who have OCD, and speaking to a lot of them, it's really unfortunate that a lot of us are tricked almost into believing that we need OCD to be successful in school. Like I've heard a lot of people say, I wouldn't have gotten into this school if I didn't have OCD and wasn't a perfectionist, or I wouldn't have gotten this internship or this job or whatever. And what I like to think about, I like to challenge that thought. I mean, I've fallen into that thought process too. I like to challenge it by saying, you can achieve like what you yourself, like, I don't know how to explain this very well, but you can achieve what you want to without OCD. OCD doesn't have to exist for you to I don't know, get the grade or get into the school. Like, you can do that on your own. OCD is actually hindering you because without OCD, you would be able to probably do it a lot more easily than with OCD. And it would probably take a lot less mental energy and stress. Yeah, I've also been told, unfortunately, in high school, like, I wish I had your brain. And I just remember thinking, no, you don't. It's just a very difficult thing to navigate, especially when you're a young person in school. And at that time, when I was in high school, I didn't know anyone else who had OCD that I knew of. So it was just everything my therapist told me, and it's hard to listen to a therapist as a kid because you're like, oh, they don't understand me, typical adolescent. But I think it's kind of like you have to like learn through experience. You have to learn through experience. But hopefully, in breaking the myth that OCD helps you, the truth is that OCD just makes things a lot more difficult. Even when you think it might be helping you, it is not. Yeah, so I just hope spreading that around will help more people learn and not have to learn through experience.
That was very powerful. I'm very much expressive on my face. So you probably saw all my thoughts and feelings and what you saw. And I hope this is resonating into the crowd. Well, I still feel like I'm on stage even when I'm on video. That this idea that, there are challenges, but it's all anchored in the energy you use to persist and overcome, right? And that comes through, one, the identification of it, like really even from Kim's position of helping both her I like to call them learners or scholars, helping learners and the scholars and those supporting your learner and scholar. It's the foundation of it is pinning it down. And then what Maya's story and what Katie said is when I identified it within myself, and we know that part of the treatment is the operationalizing of OCD, like making it its own thing so that you can create that distance, right? Like, okay, this is OCD, this is me. Yes, we have a dance going on, but it's me, taking a lead. Sometimes, it might step on my toes. Sometimes it might take the lead and flip me over, but I can get back up and I got this, right? Like that, it's that over and over and over again. And I add the over and over again because one of the things I heard consistently is that it will change. And so that brings me back to a developmental question I have that I'm just curious about from the panel, both in your experience and your observation. What would you say about OCD in this space over time? I think Maya started to talk about like from high school to now college, but I'm curious, what would you all say to that? What would a person expect to see or think about, or what would you affirm in those who are listening about the differences across the educational developmental stages?
Meant to unmute myself, but I was already unmuted. I would probably say that expect the OCD to change the theme or whatever the OCD is attaching to, because I know for me personally, in the beginning of high school, my OCD was all over the place, a bunch of different themes. And then once I was able to get treatment, the themes that persisted the most were related to things that were more relevant in my life. Kind of like, I'm trying to think. Mostly about going to college, because that was realistically what's on everyone's radar, most people's radar when you're getting towards the end of high school. And OCD just happens to attach to whatever is relevant or important to you, and that happened to be college. That can also go for, if you're applying to different high schools, when you're in middle school, it can change in that respect. Sometimes I even know like certain classes or things in school can trigger certain OCD themes. I remember in my health class in 10th grade, we were talking about, I forget exactly what it was, but it was pretty much an experiment showing how quickly germs spread. And I did not need to hear that. My contamination OCD was pretty mild to moderate at the time, and then that made it spike a little. So pretty much anything in the environment can make that whack-a-mole disorder, pop up, and you just have to keep it on its toes and keep doing the therapy, even when you think it's like at bay. Anything can really make it pop up again. So you kind of have to just keep working on your exposures and response prevention.
Yeah, Maya, just to tack on to that, I was thinking the same thing, acknowledging that it is going to shift and change throughout time, and those themes are going to change, and always still coming back to the fact that, the content is irrelevant, but the content in that moment can feel really, really tricky because OCD is latching on to the things that are significant and important to you at that phase of your life. And that might be different for each person, but I've seen lots of shifts. Gosh, I can think of me growing up, but then also with students that I've worked with where things have shifted from having obsessions about why they weren't picked for the basketball team in middle school to a space of ROCD with a first relationship in high school to then this kind of perfectionistic piece. And what if I don't get into the right college, to even students shifting into a morality component? What if I did something wrong and that'll prevent me from getting into the right college? But always latching on to those different phases of life. And to Maya's point, it can latch on to anything. And I think it doesn't mean that we shy away from those amazing experiences. It's just a great opportunity for us to use our ERP tools and to fight our OCD. But I can think of, Maya, you reminded me of something I'd forgotten about. Even when I was a kid, I remember for the first time learning about the sun potentially getting too close to the earth. And I was in first grade and I went home and I had to touch everything in a particular order before I could sit down so the sun wouldn't get too close to the earth, because if something bad happened, it would be my fault. And I used to go in every day and hug the back of my chair because I was so scared that the sun was going to get too close to the earth because of me. And my teacher came up and asked me what I was doing. And I explained it to her. And she said, "Oh, I'm having a really tough time too. I'm going through this loss in my family." And then my OCD immediately flipped and I felt totally responsible for her. So as this first grader, I came in every day and tried to make sure that my teacher was okay and that nothing bad would happen to her because it was my responsibility as 6-year-old Katie. And the reason I'm saying that is it was just even little things in the school setting that I was hearing that OCD just kind of comes in and latches onto, not for any other reason than it's important to you at that particular time.
Yeah, what Katie and Maya were speaking of was certainly the experience for my son. But for me, the trickier part was as OCD shifted, trying to explain to educators and teachers and administration how to adapt to those changes in my child. Like, what can you do to be helpful now? Because there wasn't anything written. Oh, if there had been anxiety in the classroom back then, it would have saved my life. There was an ancient Time magazine article. It's called "When Worry Hijacked the Brain," and it was the best article I had at that time to share with every teacher I had. And it was funny, some teachers wanted to learn what to do, and some were just hostile that I was trying to explain to them how they could best help my child. And there was one really beautiful experience. He was in a class, and it was a private school where uniforms were the rule of the day, and boys had to have their shirts tucked in and belted. And when my son got up from his chair at the end of class, his belt was on the floor and his shirt was slightly untucked. And this teacher knew that there was something going on with him, but this was something new. And he looked down at the belt and he looked up at her and he said, "I need to leave that there." Now, in another teacher, that teacher would have said, "Pick that up, get into dress code, you can't do that." And that teacher said, "That's fine, leave the belt there." And she called me and said, "What's going on?" Jack removed his belt and left it on the floor today. Now, she could have made a scene, but she did the right thing. She reached out, and that wasn't the norm. That was the blessing of a thinking, caring individual. But for the most part, he would have been scolded.
And honestly, Kim, that is a nice segue into the next piece of this platform. As we're talking about what you all have described, well, what you just described as what I deem a success, right? In that space. And I'm sure Katie has a lot more experiences of how she supported families and how she's navigated moving through her education. And hopefully, Maya, you can tap into some there. I'm curious if you all would share about some of those specific successes, right? Like, what did you find to be useful? Like, what did you say, or how did you frame it, or like, what was the approach, right, that you found to be the success? Because it's 6:30, and I want to make sure people walk away with like, okay, I can tweak this and make this work for me, or I can follow up with a panelist and get more information about how to do this, or talk to this teacher, or so I give that back to you all. What do you think?
Well, some of the amazing successes were a lot of people were telling me, and I've since learned that this was a common thread back, 18 years ago, but everybody's like, he's just ADHD. He's just ADHD. And then, of course we have them tested and they're like, no, he's distracted by intrusive thoughts. He doesn't have ADHD at all. And so, getting an accurate diagnosis and continuing to remind the educators that that is his diagnosis and it's very different in its approach was helpful. Another thing was, it was the early advent of a learning specialist at school. And this learning specialist, Jack, seemed very cranked up one day and he took a test and he did really poorly. And she noticed how fidgety and agitated he was always when he was particularly taking a test. And she called me and she said, he just seems too anxious to sit there and take a test. She goes, I just ordered some stand-up desks. I want him to come back tomorrow morning. Don't tell him that he's going to be retested and he's going to stand to take the test. He stood to take the test the next morning and he scored an additional 28 points because he could stand and shift and things like that. So it was a learning difference. He needed to, not be in the confines of his little tiny desk. But when he could fidget and kind of walk back and forth and check things off, he was so much better. And I just appreciated everybody that took the time to find his learning differences. We were talking about the same academic level of study and accomplishment, but he could do it differently.
Yeah, and Kim, I'm also I'm so sorry that you had that experience with some educators, and that makes me the truth that I spoke with the first one, I guess, is not in rethinking that is not always necessarily the case. I would say I love when students would come to me with accommodations, and I wish we could have every single person say that that's the case. And I'm sorry that has not been your experience. And I hope for educators listening as well that you hear how incredibly essential this is, because students learn differently. We're all different, and that's a beautiful and amazing thing. And it doesn't mean that we're at different levels. It means that we can, we can create an environment that is safe for all of our students, and that also gives them the space to be the awesome humans that they are. I would say I had the chance really to work at an institution that was really, really good about this, where we had an accommodations coordinator as well as a learning support specialist. And so again, for other educators listening, this was a model that was really, really helpful. All necessary accommodations and diagnoses would actually go through our accommodations coordinator, and they have everything written up so that when we open up our attendance every day, you can actually see the accommodations electronically with each of your students. So I can see if someone has 50% or 100% extended time. I can see if someone has a seating accommodation. I can see if someone has an accommodation that they can be in a different seat or stand up throughout the class or take a break. I have some students that because of anxiety or because of focus related things could set an alarm for themselves and every 10 minutes take a break from focusing. And all of that for me was in front of me on the computer, one of the requirements with the school that was really in tune with this was that the students at the beginning of the semester, in part to help them learn how to advocate for themselves beyond that space. And in college was kind of what I was speaking to before, that they would need to come in at the beginning of the semester and say, hey, here's what I need from you. Here's what you're going to see. Here's what I actually need. And it was my favorite time as an educator with students to be able to say, okay, well, what can I do to make your learning better? Are there additional things? If there are additional things that you need throughout the year, please let me know. And being able to have that conversation and that open understanding was really, really neat to let students know, I want to create this space for you. We all need something different to learn, and that's okay. So that's a really success story throughout my time in education. And another component specific to OCD, I think collaboration where possible with accommodations coordinators between clinicians and the school can be really helpful. I've had situations where there were particular accommodations, even around rituals while someone was moving through their hierarchy, where those accommodations would be taken away throughout the semester as the person was moving through particular aspects of their OCD treatment. And I think that's very, very possible as well if there's appropriate communication.
I love what you said, Katie, about how they adjusted the accommodations based on where the person was in their treatment and moving up their hierarchy. I think that's super important because it can be so easy to just keep the accommodations stagnant while someone's doing ERP. And then sometimes for OCD, we know the accommodations can sometimes accommodate OCD and not the individual.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. Yeah. I went to, when my OCD started, I had been in a private school for ages from grade 6 through 12. My OCD started around 8th grade-ish. And they weren't able to provide accommodations at that school because it was a private school. They didn't have the funding. And I was kind of at a loss of what to do because at one point I really needed accommodations because I couldn't finish assessments on time. I needed to be able to type my work because handwriting just took forever because I would have to rewrite. But that was a whole battle in itself. But I would say the biggest success was being able to miss some school for treatment because I had to miss a month of school, a little over a month of school for residential treatment. And my parents actually, Kim, like you did for your son, my parents actually went in and they advocated for me when I couldn't advocate for myself. Because at first the school didn't understand why I would need to take off so much time for treatment. They said, we can't do this. She's missing too much school. But then my parents went in and talked to my guidance counselor and the head of guidance and pretty much educated them on OCD. And they took it very well. They were very shocked, I think, because for people who aren't in the OCD community, what OCD really is can be a bit of a shock. And they eventually learned that, wow, she really does need this treatment. It's just like anyone else who would need to take off time from school for a surgery or a chronic physical illness. So I would say that was probably one of the biggest successes. And also they were able to, even though they didn't have any formal accommodations in place, they were able to figure it out with my teachers to send me work while I was away at residential, which was really helpful. So I would say that was probably the biggest success. And that was really helpful for me because residential ultimately was the thing that turned my life around in terms of OCD.
Yes. Yeah, initially they'll tell you, oh, your kid can't miss that much. My son missed 4 months of 6th grade and to go away to intensive. But, we did the work. We proved to them that we could still meet their academic requirements, but it took that, advocate piece and the constant explaining to make that successful. But it ultimately was. And then we experienced, intensive again in 8th grade and 12th grade and then senior year of college. But there is nothing to replace that intensive experience because, these days therapists are so overtaxed, and if you're lucky to get that weekly appointment, 1 hour a week is just not enough when OCD is really, really beating you up. And so, you know, what we need to continue to explain to educators is sometimes the best and the quickest way to get that student back to their life is to put them away, you know, for 6, 8 weeks, whatever it takes. Because if we drag it out forever, they're not coming back really in a meaningful way.
That's both Kim and Maya. That's such, it's such a great point. And being able to have, again, I hope if educators and administrators are listening, being able to support our students, particularly when they need more intensive or residential treatment, is so important. And I think there's often a lot of shame with students in that, and maybe going to tell their teachers or going to tell administrators. I would have students I was close with come to me and say, hey, I'm supposed to go do this thing, but I think I'm going to push it off another 6 months until summer because I'm scared to tell my other teachers and miss school. I'm like, no, do it. This is something for you and something you need. And every student I've had, which has been a lot, that have taken a break to go through a residential program, have come back able to succeed more fully in the classroom, able to actually rise to their full potential. And it's such a huge thing. By actually engaging in treatment, they can break down the OCD and go back to living into their values and actually being the person that they are. So just knowing, taking a few week kind of break from school and doing the work separately or whatever that looks like, actually can enhance a student's education when they come back so that they can be the student that they want to be.
Yeah, I definitely agree, Katie. Oops. Was someone going to say something? Oh, okay. Yeah, I definitely agree. I know how you said there's a bit of shame around telling your teachers, and I did that exact same thing. I pushed off going to residential until the summer when I really needed it a lot sooner. But and eventually I ended up missing the first month of school, and I was terrified of missing the first month of school, or any school, to be honest. But I'm so glad that I did, because ultimately without residential, I would not have graduated high school, and definitely would not have gone to college. So
Right.
like you said, it's kind of just like, I don't know if this is the right phrase, but like a stitch in time saves 9 kind of thing. Like, if you take the time now to do the work, even though it's a little bit obtrusive, it's going to save time in the future and make it a lot easier for you in the future.
And I think, you know, the social piece comes back a little easier too when they go away. I mean, when you're in the throes of OCD, all you can do is maybe live through the school day and come home and isolate. And in residential or intensive programs, they're with other kids, or, you know, that have OCD or are experiencing the same challenges. And they're all getting better together, and they start interacting more. And then once he goes back to school, he was actually able to create a more meaningful social life, which OCD tried to take that away too. So, you know, we want our kids to succeed in school, but we also want them to have a life. We want them to have a meaningful life with relationships and extracurricular activities, and follow their passions. But OCD will try to take all of that away. And so when we can put them in those situations with other people that are experiencing the same challenges they have and working on it together, I think they come back better and stronger across the board.
And so let's keep that conversation going, because the way the conversation has moved is, leading up to it, you identify that there's a concern, you attempt to get accommodations. The severity increases. If they need to go off the treatment, they go, then they come back. I think this is the perfect space to show up again and say, okay, what is the practical application of advocacy integrating back into the educational space? What does homework time look like? What does parenting stress look like? Like, what does educator stress look like? Speak more to that.
Yeah, go ahead, Kim.
No, you go ahead. It's okay.
I was just going to say, especially, with students returning again, for educators to hear some things that can be really helpful. I guess personally, things I think we should be doing all the time anyway, but making sure that you're checking in with your students to see where they are, particularly if they're coming back from intensive treatment or are currently in treatment, to make sure that they are feeling supported, to make sure that they're feeling seen. And even just asking them, I've found with students, even just asking, hey, how are things going? Or how is it to be back in an offline way can really go a long way. On a personal note with students, I always did roses, buds, and thorns at the beginning of every class. And then we had a checkout form at the end of class where nobody else could see it except me. They knew they could always put in whatever they needed to put in. It had a feelings wheel, and it also had a space of, yeah.
What is roses, buds, and thorns?
Oh, so Rose, sorry. Yeah, I did that for 7 years. So I'm like, everybody knows. No. So at the beginning of every class, I would go around to every student. It would just take all of 10 minutes. And you could say a rose, something good that's going on, a thorn, if you want to share something that's hard for you right now, and a bud, something that's coming up that might either make you anxious or excited. There's never any pressure. You can choose to share or not share. But it gave a space for a lot of students actually to create an environment for some kids who were going through treatment to actually share and gain support from other students in the classroom, especially if they were coming back or something like that. And then always at the end of every class, I had a checkout form where students would put, it had a feelings wheel on it. They could pick how they were feeling at that particular time. And it would also have a blank for anything else that they wanted to share with me. And after the kids left every class, it would just go into an Excel and I would check. And it was a habit so that students would never feel like I was calling anyone out or making anyone feel like, hey, I'm checking on you especially. But it was a really great space for students to feel like if I'm having a tough time, whether you're in treatment, coming back from treatment, or even having mental health struggles, that you can put that into a safe space and know that your teacher is going to see that and can have a conversation with you at a later time.
That's great. Great. Well, for me, the thing that I learned moving forward in advocacy, was that I had developed my own anxiety around my son's OCD. And when it's time for him to go off to college, he was doing really well, and he got in where he wanted to go, and he was all fired up to go. But I was, hyper vigilant about, we've got to apply for disability services. Even if you don't use them, let's do this. And I had just gotten myself completely wound up about this process that he was going to go off and he was going to face all these challenges and his OCD was going to spiral out of control. And I sort of tell that story in that blog that I mentioned, but basically he's like, Mom, get a grip, just promise me you're not going to embarrass me when you drop me off. And I went to the family farewell picnic, and it was time to leave after that. And I just took a big bite of a chicken sandwich without, I don't think, even breathing or chewing, and I got it lodged in my throat. And I literally was in trouble, and he realized that I was actually choking, and this other parent from another table came running over and did the Heimlich maneuver, and I vomited up the chicken sandwich and then everything else in my stomach. And my son looks down at me and says, thanks so much for not embarrassing me like I told you. But I was so worried about what it was going to look like when he went off to college. And I needed to just let him have those experiences. And the other thing I learned is that accommodation doesn't always help. The only accommodation we used was to give him his own room and his own bathroom as a freshman. And that turned out to not be so helpful to his OCD, because as soon as things got contaminated, he could throw it in a corner. Nobody could see what OCD was doing, and so the rituals increased. And we found out the next year when we moved him into communal living that he did a lot better about keeping his OCD and his rituals in check because he was around other people and didn't want them to see, and he, was taking more responsibility for keeping, those rituals to a minimum. So, we made mistakes along the way, and what I've given myself the grace to understand is this is a lifelong learning process for me as well. I'm going to love him forever. I'm mom, and, it's, sometimes the things that you have to do for OCD is counterintuitive to the precepts of love and nurture that, are the primal concepts of a parent. But, ultimately, I'm learning every day as I love him every day. So.
I love that. It's nice to hear, like, it's very interesting to hear everyone's perspectives, because going through all of this as the student with OCD, I was just like, first of all, when you have such severe OCD, like, you just can't really focus on anything else or really like think about what other people are thinking about. But it's just so interesting to hear what educators and parents think as this process goes along. I bet my parents were also, I don't know if my mom's watching, hi mom, but I bet I think she was also very nervous along the way. Especially when I moved to college. I was very nervous going to college, so I just was going to talk about that a little bit. I pretty much, it was a running joke in my family, but it was also very serious that I was insistent that I was not going to college. Even though I applied to college, and like I was kind of dragged through the process because I knew I wanted to deep down go to college. I like was dragged through the process and got into college, and all throughout the summer I was like, I'm not going to college, I'm not going to college, packing for college, I'm not going, driving there, I'm not going, and like going into my dorm, I'm not going. And then I freaked out and was like refusing to let my parents leave me, and it was a whole big thing. But eventually we did set some reasonable accommodations in place to help me like stay at college, because we all knew that that's what I really wanted to do. I eventually was able to like acclimate pretty quickly. It was like a very steep like climax of anxiety, and then I acclimated pretty quickly. But yeah, also going back to the whole residential thing, coming back from residential treatment or intensive treatment. I was in high school, and I don't know if I've talked to some other friends who've been to intensive treatment and returned back to school, but there's almost like a little like high that you have. You're like, oh wow, I just beat all my OCD, and like I feel on top of the world. Like I didn't even care about people like saying, where were you? I was just like, yeah, I was in treatment. Like I didn't care. I was like advocating for myself. So I think a lot of kids coming back from intensive treatment kind of feel like they're so strong and they can do anything. Obviously there's still going to be anxiety about it. But you're kind of coming off of facing all of your fears. So it's not something that's too difficult at that time, usually. Yeah, so I would just say to any student who's coming back from intensive treatment, it's normal to be nervous, and it's going to be an adjustment. Your OCD might revert back a little bit. That's expected. Continued treatment is key. And also with the transition going to college, continued treatment is also key, because my therapist actually, she helped me so much when it came to coming to college. I did almost like a mini intensive with her around going to college, because it was just that big of a stressor. So to any student who's facing those challenges, it's possible. I didn't think I was going to college, and here I am, a senior in college. So it's very weird to think about, but it's possible. I just want to let everyone know that it's possible.
And also, Maya, you're not just a senior in college. You're a senior in college who like started a whole OCD support group at your college. I mean, that's a big
very active, which was courageous, very courageous, right? And I would love to speak to what it was for me to hear about the joy you had And I imagine other young people coming out of intensive experience like that. That warmed my heart, because I know how impactful OCD can be, and it just steals all the joy. That's what I tell people. Like, it's just going to steal your joy. It's just the thief of joy. That's exactly how I describe it. And to know that you come out on that high, I think that's super important for all of us to hear. Right? Because as Kim shared, and as a clinician, but also as a parent, as an educator, like we get in those spaces, like we got to protect them, we got to take care of them. And it's like, no, what I hear you saying is like, just give us a little space. Just step back and watch. Like, you can come in and help us, but just let us like feel great, right? Because, you know, OCD is going to come back and try again. But for this one moment in my life, like, I'm walking on cloud nine. Like, this is amazing. So I wanted to like really highlight that and bring that forward, because we don't often, at least I don't get to hear the happy joy stories. Like, oh my God, I'm so happy I went to school and I did this and I did that. I don't get to hear that. I just get to bring like one more person in for therapy, you know, and we have our little joys and, you know, happiness in the moment, but I don't get to follow you to school. I don't get to follow you to college. Once you're done with me, you're done. So it's just, I'm just so excited to hear that is amazing. Right. And so parents, hear that, like, hear it, celebrate. And I know you're nervous, Nancy, on the inside, because again, I am too a parent, but like, let them have it, you know? That's amazing. You guys are amazing. Oh my God, it's 6:55. I told you all we would get here and we'd be like, oh my goodness, where did the time go? So with that, because you all have done an amazing job of just speaking to the experience, giving tangible things, giving actionable things, giving things that people can take away and adapt or apply or follow up with you all, just for more questions, what would be the one thing you would leave with folks? Whether it's an affirmation, whether it's a strategy, whether it's a proactive way around advocacy, like what would you leave with folks? No pressure.
I would probably say that you can be successful academically with OCD. Even if you're going through like a struggle and it makes you like repeat a year of school or drop out of school for a time, it's possible to be successful with OCD. I was actually talking to a few people about this on my OCD Instagram account. This one woman replied, I'm a lawyer and I have OCD. Now I teach law. And one person was like, I'm a doctor. I have OCD. One person is like, I have a family and have OCD. I got married. I never thought I'd be able to get married. And I know those aren't really academically related, but you can be successful with OCD, even if it feels impossible and you just like can't see a future for yourself. It's still possible with hard work.
Thank you, Maya. I guess for me, for speaking to both sides, to educators who might be listening, I just want to acknowledge, we talked about, you know, responding to accommodations in really positive ways and other ways that might not always be as positive. And I really believe everybody goes into education because we love students and we want to help students. And I think sometimes the negative responses are just a lack of understanding, and sometimes even a fear around, what if I don't get this right? What if I don't understand? What if I don't do this correctly? Am I supposed to do this? And I would encourage everybody, just like we ask folks to do with OCD, to lean into the discomfort. If you have a student who's talking to you, have the hard conversation and say, how can I help you? How can I help you learn to the best of your ability and give you everything that you need? And it's going to make your job as an educator that much easier as you see your students fly. So that's advice to educators and for students, for scholars, for others who might be listening. Just know that you are not alone, that it does get better. And through evidence-based treatment, I truly believe, and in my experience, like Maya talked about, that there is a chance for joy and for presence and for all of the things that you want in your life.
Yes. And for me, I think that just staying close to your kid, you know, do you want me to come to this event at school or don't you want me to come? And I was blessed that my son and I, through all those thousands of hours of therapy together, we really are so close. We're so close. I mean, we we have a playlist to the road trips of our lives. You know, we just definitely have stayed close through college, but you will still run into those professors and educators that will say, you know, they can't really miss and they can't really do that. And I would just say, don't take no for an answer. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. And let me tell you, I would be that squeaky wheel every single day. I'm sorry, if you think he can't go off to intensive and during senior year of college, guess what? He's going, and I'll show you how. And we were able to work it out every single time, but you will get those scary no's. And I'm just saying, don't listen to them. Don't listen to them. Just stay kind, stay conversational with administration and you know, maybe heads of departments and things like that. But educate them. They sometimes need to understand, and it's not that they're ignorant, they just haven't faced it before. And I think once you give them the tools to conceptualize how this child's education is going to move forward, even though we have to take a break, anything is possible.
Absolutely. Well done.
Thank
you. Someone else has something to say?
No.
Well done, you all. Yes, we are out of time, but I want to take the time to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Like, my heart is so full right now, and I hope everyone who had the opportunity to join this panel walks away with something useful. I am very appreciative of the experience that graced our presence this evening. I feel compelled to go out and find something to do for kids in the school system. I don't know what, but I feel compelled to move because I told you I'm a doer. And I also want to leave, because I am a doer, and I think it's super important for people to know what their next move might be. One of the things that I'll leave with you all is this idea about language. Language is so important. To be able to position yourself and to effectively communicate what you need, what's going on. I know that's the premise for therapy when you're in therapy. That's the premise for advocacy, but that's also the premise for the learning differences, right? Using language like these are learning differences, right? Staying conversational, as Kim described. Educating them, because you're right, they cannot wrap their brains around it. And so how do we communicate? We give them words. We give them words. And we frame it in a way that's very intentional. I am all about being intentional. So yes, I'm gonna be kind up to an extent, right? I'm gonna kindly convey my expectation that he's going. You see that smile that she gave when she said it? He's going. That's how you gotta approach it, right? Because it's gonna be tough. It's gonna be tough. It's tough for the young person or the scholar. It's tough for the administrators because they have their box they have to fit in. It's tough for the educators because to Katie's point, it's like everybody has a big heart, and sometimes even parents experience this. Like, I just don't know what else to do. I just don't know what else to do. We are all in this space of, and so be in the advocacy role, whether it's you advocating for yourself or you advocating for your learner or your scholar. Sometimes it's thinking through, what's the tagline? What's the elevator pitch? Let's simplify it. Let's scale it down so we can narrow in on exactly what we need. And this is for all those who will come to the table and speak on behalf of this learner. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. We have collected questions if you had any. The panelists are available through the information that you see here if you want to reach out to them for some follow-up questions or whatnot. I would go down the list of everything that we share, but I will leave this final thing with you. Get an accurate diagnosis. If you are thinking anything about accommodations, get the diagnosis. And I promise you, that is the foundation, and you can build from there. It won't be easy, but that's the foundation if you're dealing with any educational realm. So, somebody has something to say?
No, I was just saying thumbs up to that.
Yes. All right. So with that, we'll close out. Thank you so much. Just a heads up, there are some there's Ask the Experts tomorrow. That is generally with Dr. Jonathan Abramowitz and Liz, where you get to, if you have some follow-up questions about this, I'm sure you can hike over there. There are specific topics on OCD in the classroom. There's a lunch and learn on the 28th. And then there's also the IOCDF's Anxiety in the Classroom. If you want more information about this, please use all of those platforms. And again, we are always available for follow-up. Thank you all. Have a great evening. Thank you, panelists. I am so appreciative. We'll see you all in a couple months. Have a good evening.
Thank you.